It was Halloween, and I was dressed as a pirate. I had a crooked red bandana tied around my head and a plastic pumpkin bucket in my hand, already stuffed full of candy. I had just turned 10 and thought I was pretty brave. I also couldn't stand my little sister, Sarah, who followed me everywhere like a shadow. She was dressed as a little black cat, with whiskers drawn on her cheeks, trailing behind me no matter how fast I walked. We were running up and down the neighborhood with the other kids. Any house with its porch light still on was fair game. We'd bang on the door and yell, "Trick or treat." Most people laughed and dropped candy into our buckets. A few kind old folks even patted me on the head. Sarah kept whining that she wanted her bucket as full as mine, but she was slow, and I kept running ahead to lose her on purpose. At the end of the street, there was one house that stood out. No jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, no warm light in the windows. It looked empty, but the front door was ajar, and a draft of cold, damp air drifted out. I stood at the doorway and peeked in. There was a faint light inside, and I could hear a rustling sound, like someone sorting through bags of candy. I turned to look for Sarah, but she was crouched on the lawn comparing candy with another group of kids. Perfect. I wouldn't have to share with her if I got more candy here. So I pushed the door open wider and called out, "Trick or treat." No answer. Then a man I didn't know stepped into the hallway. He smiled, but it didn't look quite right. His mouth was stretched too wide, like it was stuck that way. He was holding a bag of candy, shaking it slightly. I saw chocolate bars and gummy worms peeking out, and my excitement drowned out whatever unease I felt. He told me there were even bigger bags of candy downstairs, and asked if I wanted to pick some myself. I didn't even think, I just followed him inside. The stairs were at the end of a narrow hallway. A single dim bulb flickered overhead. Each step creaked under my weight as I carefully made my way down. The air smelled stale and damp, like wet cardboard. I had just reached the bottom when, bang, the door slammed shut behind me. And then click, it locked. My heart jumped into my throat. I bolted back up the stairs and pounded on the door, screaming. My fists hurt, but nobody answered. It was pitch black except for a single bare bulb in the far corner of the basement, casting a lonely pool of light, like it was waiting for me to come closer. I pulled my jacket tighter and shuffled along the wall until I was standing under it. There were stacks of cardboard boxes. I opened one. Just scraps of cloth and torn up newspapers. Another box held a doll. Most of its hair had fallen out, and one glassy eyeball lay loose in the corner, staring at me. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then I heard it. From behind the wall, thump, 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 like footsteps. I stumbled back and stepped on something wet. My feet slipped, and I landed hard on the cold floor. My palms were icy against the concrete. Panicking, I dug through the boxes, desperate for something heavy to break the door with. I found an old broom handle and smacked it against the door over and over. It didn't even budge. Time crawled like it was frozen. I cried until my voice went raw. At some point, exhaustion blurred everything. I would nod off for a few seconds, only to jerk awake at the faint noises from the corner, soft, deliberate sounds. Like someone was lying flat on the other side of the wall, copying my breathing. I huddled against the wall, arms wrapped around my knees, staring into the darkness. In my head, I called for Sarah, for Mom, for Dad. I thought I was going to die down there. Just when I was sure I'd never get out, there was a sudden loud pounding on the door from the other side. And then Sarah's voice. She was crying, screaming my name. I heard my parents too, shouting, their voices frantic. Then a man yelling back, angry, deep, muffled. I scrambled to the door and started slamming my fists against it. "I'm here! I'm here!" I screamed as loud as I could. And then, the door yanked open, light flooded in, so bright it hurt my eyes. Mom pulled me out and held me so tight I could barely breathe. I was shaking all over. Dad was shouting at the strange man. There was more yelling, a scuffle. Then the police came. They took the man away. I was bundled into the car, wrapped in a blanket. Sarah climbed in next to me, her tiny hand gripping my sleeve like she'd never let go. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, still wet with tears. She didn't say a word, just stared at me scared, but also mad. When we got home, I got sick, feverish. I lay in bed 4 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that heavy basement door, refusing to open no matter how hard I pushed. Sarah sat by my bed while I dozed, sipping juice through a straw. Sometimes she'd press her little hand to my forehead to check if I was awake. If I opened my eyes, she'd quickly look away and pretend she wasn't worried. When I finally felt well enough to talk, I asked Mom how they knew where I was. She said Sarah had seen me go into that house, but never come out. So she ran home crying and told them. I froze. It hit me that, if she hadn't seen me, if she hadn't run for help, I'd probably still be locked down there. Mom told me to share my leftover Halloween candy with Sarah. I didn't even hesitate. I pushed my entire bucket into her lap, and even picked out the nicest chocolate bar and handed it to her. Sarah's eyes went wide. She was so surprised she dropped a piece of candy without noticing. I watched her happily bite into the chocolate, and for the first time, I felt safe. I used to think she was annoying, always tagging along, always stealing my snacks. But that night, she saved me, and after that, she became my favorite little shadow. No matter how noisy or clingy she got, I didn't mind anymore, because now I knew there's no one else in the world who would cry and run through the dark just to bring me back home. That afternoon after school, jack-o'-lanterns were already glowing along the streets, and kids were running around with plastic buckets, candy wrappers skittering across the pavement. I hadn't planned on joining in the chaos, but Tom came to find me. He said we needed to do something different, otherwise Halloween was just another boring Friday. He dragged me out. We stopped by the convenience store, grabbed chips, beef jerky, and a few bags of candy, just to make it look like we cared. Halfway through eating, Tom said, "Let's go to the cemetery." I rolled my eyes at him. I was already uneasy, but I didn't want to look like a coward, so I muttered, "What's there to be scared of?" and followed him. We walked several blocks before the streetlights thinned out and the iron gates of the cemetery loomed ahead. The second we reached the entrance, the air turned cold. A chill swept through so sharp it almost made me drop the candy in my mouth. Tom tossed his snacks on the ground, kicked a few dead leaves aside, and started walking over the gravel path. I crumpled my candy wrapper and threw it in a trash can, forcing myself to catch up. At first, we were still laughing, making up stupid stories about the old headstones, how this one probably had a vampire under it, and that one still had an open coffin waiting for someone to climb back in. But every time we started laughing, it died off awkwardly, like the sound was getting swallowed by the air. That's when I realized how quiet it was, too quiet. So quiet you could hear every crunch of leaves under our sneakers. Rows of tombstones stretched ahead, faded and cracked, some too weathered to even read the names. I kicked at some weeds, not seeing anything interesting, just trailing behind Tom. Then Tom bent down, picked up a small rock, and chucked it at an old, crumbling gravestone. It hit with a dull thud and knocked off a piece of brick. I told him he was being an idiot, but my stomach tightened. He shook his beer can and took a gulp, like he was trying to look tough. A few steps later, I noticed a marble grave off to the side. Next to it was a wilted wreath, half collapsed. I nudged it with my shoe to push it back into place, and that's when I saw it. A small hole, like the ground had cracked open. I leaned down to take a closer look. It was too dark to see anything, but a cold, damp breath of air rushed up into my face. I staggered back immediately. Tom came over to look, but his foot slipped, and he nearly fell right into it. I tried to grab him, but my grip slipped, and we both ended up tumbling to the ground, rolling in the dirt. His beer can went clattering toward another grave with a hollow sound. Something about the noise made my skin crawl. I grabbed Tom's arm. Let's just go. This place is wrong. He brushed off his pants, ready to make fun of me for being scared, when we heard it, a soft laugh. Right behind us, we froze. Our eyes darted around. Not a single person was in sight, but the wind was circling above us, cold and sharp, crawling up the back of my neck. Tom shouted, "Who's there?" But his voice cracked. I could hear the fear in it. Right after he yelled, from behind a cracked gravestone up ahead, half a face slowly peeked out. In the moonlight, I couldn't see the features clearly. Just long, stringy hair, plastered weightly to its forehead. My breath caught. I grabbed Tom's arm, pulling at him, but he was rooted to the spot, barely breathing. The face slid out a little more, then shoulders, clothes hanging off it in damp, rotten shreds, like fabric that had been soaked and left to rot. It started crawling forward, hands pressing into the dirt, nails digging and dragging through the soil. I yanked Tom hard, and that snapped him out of it. We bolted, tripping, slipping, falling, our knees banging against stones. We didn't stop. We reached the bench where we'd left our drinks, beer cans scattered across the ground, but Tom didn't even glance at them. He just shoved me ahead, sprinting toward the exit. But when we hit the iron gates, they wouldn't budge. They weren't locked, but they wouldn't move. It was like something was holding them shut from the other side. Tom started ramming his shoulder against the gate. I pressed myself against his back, and when I looked over my shoulder, it was coming closer, gliding. Its feet barely touched the ground. I panicked, grabbed the heavy chain from the side of the gate, and started shoving it into the gap, muttering nonsense. I don't even know what. And suddenly the gate gave way. It just opened. We didn't think, we just ran. We tumbled down the steps, hit the sidewalk, and didn't stop running until we reached the bright lights of the main street. I doubled over, gasping so hard I thought I might throw up. My heart was pounding so loud it hurt. Tom was on the ground too, breathing like he was going to die. Never going back to that place, he wheezed. I didn't know if I wanted to yell at him or at myself for going along with it. All I knew was, if anyone ever suggested hanging out at that cemetery again, I wouldn't go within a mile of it. It was around 6:30 in the evening. The sky had already gone dark early, a light drizzle falling outside. The streets were full of kids in cheap capes, carrying plastic buckets, and going door to door for candy. I was behind the counter, wiping the edge with a rag. The store speakers were playing some Halloween playlist, one of those songs that was almost over, but still stuck in your head. The volume was low, but the tune was annoying enough after hearing it all day. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 2 more hours until my shift ended. I was thinking about whether I'd microwave pizza or pasta when I got home. I had just finished restocking and walked back to the register when the doorbell chimed. 2 people walked in wearing oversized black raincoats. They had monster masks on. One was a wrinkled, snarling werewolf face. The other was a skull with its mouth slit all the way to the ears. They didn't say a word. They didn't head for the candy aisle like I expected. They walked straight toward me, steady, unhurried. Before I could react, the one in the skull mask pulled a black gun from inside his coat. He didn't raise it high, just enough to aim at my chest. In his other hand, he pulled out a folded-up grocery bag and tossed it on the counter. Put the cash in, now. It was the skull mask guy who spoke. His voice was low, muffled, but young. I didn't say anything. I just turned, opened the register, and started stuffing the bills into the bag one by one. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to climb into my throat. They didn't shout, didn't threaten me beyond that. They just stood there, staring through those masks. The silence was so thick it felt like the air itself was pressed down on me. And then the door opened again. A middle-aged man stepped inside, shaking off his umbrella. He smelled faintly of rain, keys jingling in his hand. Everything went sideways in an instant. The werewolf-masked guy flinched, his hand jerked, and he fired. The gunshot was deafening, sharp like shattering glass. The man's legs buckled. He crumpled onto the floor, his keys skittering away. He groaned, rolling on the ground, choking on his own breath before starting to convulse violently. Blood spread fast, soaking through his pant leg and pooling on the tiles. "What the hell are you doing?" the skull mask guy hissed. His voice cracked with panic. He grabbed his partner by the shoulder. They started shoving each other right there in front of the counter. The tension spiked in an instant, raw and chaotic. While they were distracted, I crouched down, reaching for my phone to call 911, but the shooter noticed. He turned toward me, gun raised again. "Don't move," he barked. I froze, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering on the floor. "He's gonna die," I yelled. "He's seizing. If you don't call an ambulance, he's gonna die." The shooter didn't care. His breathing was erratic, his grip on the gun trembling. The skull mask guy spun on him, grabbed him harder, desperate now. "Enough, stop." They were no longer a team, they were fighting. They stumbled into the refrigerated drinks section, smashing into the glass doors with loud thuds. I stood there behind the counter, paralyzed. My legs felt nailed to the floor. My phone was still lying by the corner of the counter. I reached for it. My hands were shaking, but I managed to hit the call button. Just then, the shooter turned toward me again, aiming the gun. Behind that mask, he didn't make a sound, but I could feel the tension, like a bowstring pulled to the breaking point. And right before it snapped, the skull mask guy lunged at him from behind. He tackled him, slamming him into the candy rack. They went down hard, shells toppled, candy spilled everywhere. They were brawling now, wild punches connecting with sickening thuds. The skull mask guy scrambled onto his back, pinned him, and slammed him into the ground again. The shooter swung an elbow and knocked his mask sideways. For a split second, I saw his face blurred in the chaos, but human, terrified. Then the shooter grabbed something and smashed it into the skull mask guy's head. He crumpled, sliding to the floor by the ice cooler, motionless. The shooter stood there panting, staring at me. I thought he was going to finish it, me, him, everything, but instead he ran. He bolted out the door, disappearing into the Halloween rain-soaked night. I scrambled for my phone and called an ambulance, called the cops. My whole body felt hollow, like I'd been emptied out. The man who got shot was pale as paper, his fingers twitching weakly. The guy in the skull mask was still breathing, just knocked out. I kicked his gun far away, then sat down on the floor, waiting for the sirens. The police came fast, the ambulance came even faster. The convenience store turned into a crime scene. Bloody footprints, shell casings, smashed candy wrappers littered the place. I told the police it was the guy who ran who fired the gun. The one who stayed behind, the one they arrested, had a mask, had a gun, but he tried to stop it. He saved my life. I didn't lie, he really did. When the cops took him away, he glanced at me once. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't anger. It was just blank, like he didn't even know why he was there. A few days later, I stayed home on leave. I didn't even turn on the TV, but I decided to visit him in the hospital. He was lying there hooked up to an IV, no expression on his face. He looked thinner than I remembered. He didn't smile, didn't say anything, just nodded once. When the nurse came in, I left. Later, in court, I testified. I told them he tried to stop his partner, that he protected me. Because it was true. It wasn't some grand moral choice. I just thought, if someone can still try to do the right thing in the middle of a nightmare like that, maybe they don't deserve to be treated like the same kind of monster. He got 3 years. After he got out, he didn't go back to his old neighborhood. He moved to another city, got a job at a car wash, Every now and then, he sends me a text. Just simple stuff, asking how I'm doing, complaining about the weather, saying the customers at the convenience store must still be boring. I don't know if he's really changed. I don't plan to find out, but he's still alive. And that night in the convenience store, maybe it changed his life, too.